No one would blame Mrs. Hargreaves for scrubbing her hands 5 times after the event, nor Mr. Scrumpton for refusing his usual scone at the Old Bull and Vine. By 11:17 on a blustery Wednesday morning, the Flaxborough Allotment Society's spring raffle, generally an affair as uneventful as marrow judging, had transformed the market hall into a theatre of public shame. The scandal sprang with the sharp slap of Mrs. Fawley's handbag against the table, followed in quick, mortifying order by her shrill, "That's not my ticket," which silenced even Mrs. Beasley's chronic throat-clearing. The winning claim, displayed for all to see, bore 3 uneven digits, 144. Mrs. Fawley, who habitually eschewed odd numbers for the more harmonious events, flashed a face as thunderous as a harvest sky. The winning basket of tulips, by tradition the highlight of the raffle, sat untouched beside a misplaced bottle of elderberry cordial, a detail that would soon ignite speculative flames. "Oh, she's never had luck with bulbs," hissed Mr. Copping, leaning across rows of greying hair. Elsie Barrow, hands tight around her purse, whispered, "It's always the same, ever since that business with the jam." The verger's nose twitched. "Odd, those tulips are not Mrs. Rumsey's usual arrangement, Mr. Pettiford at the grocer's. Ticket looks tampered with. Never trust a gardener with thin fingers," old Mrs. Pigeon muttered. "Someone's been clipping again, mark my words." A visual clue lay beneath the table, where few but the observant would notice a single yellow tulip petal, not matching the red and white blooms presented, tucked beneath a scuffed floorboard, as though deliberately or carelessly discarded in haste. Inspector Purbright, whose arrival moments later was as understated as always, drifted past the bristling ranks of amateurs and experts, his eye falling quietly on the orphaned petal. He said, upon gently lifting it, "Curious how Flora sometimes favours the floor above the prize table." His line in mild, almost apologetic contrast to prevailing hysteria made Mr. Scrumpton squint, and Mrs. Hargreaves gulp all her tea without tasting it. In the taut pause that followed, Mrs. Rumsey, responsible for arranging both flowers and numbers, recoiled at a folded envelope poking from her knitting bag, addressed in her own hand, unmistakably, to the mayor, strictly private. She flushed crimson, clutching it just as the council treasurer, Mr. Hobb, fumbled with his notebook and declared, too loudly, "There's a ticket missing from the sheet, number 143 unaccounted for." A line of tension ran through the room, visible and not entirely polite. A scandalous tulip, a suspicious envelope, and now a vanished ticket. The town's weekday calm splintered, and everyone, for their own reasons, strained to conceal something. As the market hall's clamour ebbed into brittle silence, the locals drifted out in cliques and pairs, retelling their own versions before the facts had even had a chance to settle. Each departure was accompanied by a flurry of glances, some furtive, some brazenly speculative, at the tulip basket, the envelope in Mrs. Rumsey's hand, and the patch of floor spoiled by that errant petal. By midday, the incident had begun its transformation, courtesy of the town's collective imagination, into a scandal fit for council minutes and pub banter alike. Inspector Purbright lingered among the dwindling crowd, his gaze resting thoughtfully on the table's edge, as though he might unearth something by sheer politeness, with a measured nod to Sergeant Love, who had spent the better part of the morning scribbling in his notebook with the solemnity of a man constructing bridges rather than hypotheses. Purbright set about the day's work. Their first stop was Mrs. Fawley herself, found outside the hall, fussing with her umbrella despite the sunny haze. "I'd never claim a tulip prize on an odd number, Inspector," she declared, voice quavering with righteous conviction. "Numbers have meanings here, everyone knows, even if they've no head for figures." She blinked rapidly at Sergeant Love, who nodded, as if this clarified all matters. Purbright, non-committal, glanced at the raffle stub she pressed upon him. 142, pristine except for a small ink smudge. "Were you in sight of your ticket at all times?" he asked mildly. Mrs. Fawley tensed. "I left it with Mrs. Beasley when I fetched biscuits, but she wouldn't have dared touch it, not with the chairman standing by." A pause, and another thing, my shoes scuffed the floor. I noticed it just there, before any tulip petal appeared, mind. The inspector filed this quietly. With no urgency, he strolled toward Mrs. Beasley, who was now consuming her biscuits in nervous succession beneath the shadow of the church clock. Mrs. Beasley, round and anxious, protested her innocence at length before diverting matters altogether. "It's Mrs. Rumsey you want, not me, Inspector, always moving things about. Did you know she brought an extra basket this morning? Said she was experimenting with colour harmony?" She wagged a stubby finger. "Well, I think she's experimenting with something else. Sergeant Love, earnest as ever, scribbled Rumsey's suspicious baskets in neat capitals." Gossip drifted in on the breeze, amplified by the passing of Mr. Pettiford and Elsie Barrow. "Mark my words, the mayor knows more than he's letting on," Mr. Pettiford muttered. Elsie replied, "I'd sooner trust my dog with the town funds than that man." He didn't even blink when the ticket went missing. The pair steered Purbright naturally toward the next matter, Mrs. Rumsey and her conspicuous envelope. She was intercepted near the war memorial, clutching her knitting bag, the envelope now tucked out of sight but not disposed of. Her manner was grandly apologetic. "It's a private matter, Inspector, not for the public raffle, just committee nonsense." Her cheeks were the colour of undercooked ham. "Of course, Mrs. Rumsey," Purbright agreed. "May I ask how many tulip baskets you prepared?" There appears to be some confusion. The inspector's tone, as ever, permitted embarrassment but did not traffic in accusation. Mrs. Rumsey hesitated. "Only one for the draw, and another for council display. But someone moved my arrangement. I noticed a petal missing before the start. That yellow never belonged in my scheme." She found her voice growing shrill. "If you ask me, someone interfered. The ticket, the flowers, there's a pattern to all this. Sergeant Love, always hopeful for patterns, wrote, 'Pattern? Petal missing.'" Just as the conversation edged toward discomfort, the parade of council members arrived, led by Mr. Hobb, still fumbling with his notebook. He greeted Purbright with all the forced decorum of a man who dreaded both publicity and clarity. "We were missing ticket 143, as I've said quite plainly," he stated for the third time that day. "There's a possibility it was misprinted or perhaps mislaid altogether. Mrs. Rumsey is in charge of tickets. Your query should begin and end with her, if you want my opinion." "So you saw the sheets before the draw?" Purbright asked gently. Hobb faltered. "Briefly. I checked the numbers while passing, but the sheets changed hands more than once. The mayor did his rounds behind the table, probably checking as well. I couldn't swear to anything after that." He closed his notebook with a clack that suggested finality. Besides, these sorts of muddles resolve themselves. Purbright said nothing. He was, but for a faint inclination of the head, unreadable. Meanwhile, Sergeant Lovritius and Methodical approached the mayor, who was engaged in an unnecessarily loud conversation about council repainting schedules. The mayor, tall and blessed with a politician's ability to deflect, welcomed the inspector with a gesture too grand for the occasion. "Unfortunate about the prize mix-up, Inspector. These things happen, committee work being what it is. If Mrs. Rumsey's envelope concerns protocol, I assure you it's all above board. The missing ticket? Likely an administrative oversight." Purbright regarded him. "Indeed, sir. Is it customary for misplaced tickets to be numbered in such a fashion? 143 appears sandwiched between well-documented claims." The mayor brightened, hoping for escape. We follow the traditional sequence, naturally. Mrs. Rumsey oversees the books. She's precise in these matters. The council intervenes only at the draw. Sergeant Love asked, "Did you handle any baskets this morning, sir?" The mayor's denials were swift, practised, and nearly too rehearsed. "Not me. My duties are strictly ceremonial." I shook hands and cut ribbons, and never touched a basket. The next hour saw Purbright and Love drifting through the town's latticework of conversation, listening for connection. At Haynes's bakery, the staff speculated about ticket forgery. It's all too easy these days, isn't it? While up at the library, Mrs. Pettiford produced a typed page from last year's Raffle, hoping for a precedent to the present mess. No missing numbers then, only an accidental double entry. Elsewhere, Mr. Copping bemoaned gardening rivalries. Mrs. Rumsey hasn't spoken to Mrs. Folly since the incident with the daffodil bulbs. And I'll tell you, Inspector, flowers aren't the only things getting swapped in this town. Purbright listened, measuring each denouncement and defence as if weighing seed packets by the ounce. No outward suspicion crossed his face, but each detail seemed stored away. Late in the afternoon, a new angle emerged. Word reached him via Elsie Barrow, who somehow knew every council whisper before it was spoken, that the bottle of elderberry cordial beside the tulip basket had not appeared on the Raffle list. "No one claims it," Elsie confided in Love. "Perhaps it wasn't meant as a prize. Maybe someone left it by mistake or for someone specific." Love found himself confused by drinks in the place of flowers. "You'd need to be rather thirsty to want it," he remarked. The inspector, meanwhile, revisited the market hall. The scuffed floorboard had been swept clean, but the yellow petal was gone, as if it never existed. In its place sat a faded flyer for the Allotment Society's upcoming summer fete, a perfectly mundane item that felt like a placeholder for something more sinister. He examined the flyer, fingers trailing the edge. Nothing obvious. Yet as he turned to leave, he noticed a faint smear of yellow on the leg of the raffle table, just underneath where the petal had lain. He tapped Love on the shoulder, muttering, "A petal's journey, Sergeant, seldom travels alone." Love looked perplexed, but dutiful. "Shall I check the other baskets for loose petals, sir?" "If you please," Purbright replied, voice neutral. "And afterwards we might inquire at the council offices about the handling of raffle stubs." Evening filtered in. Windows glowed above the high street, and somewhere beyond the gossip deepened, rising in pitch and colour. In the snug at the Old Bull and Vine, Mr. Copping assured his companions someone's up to more than flower arranging. At sunset, as Purbright passed Mrs. Rumsey's cottage, a figure ducked hurriedly behind her private hedge, quick enough to escape identification, yet carrying a conspicuous bulge not unlike a bottle. The inspector took note, smiling faintly. By the close of day, Flaxborough was wound tighter than a skein of Mrs. Rumsey's yarn. Each interview, hint, and exchanged glance sharpened the town's appetite for answers. Purbright's detachment, serene and inscrutable, was itself a clue. With a petal missing, a ticket unaccounted for, a prize misplaced, and now a cordial bottle unclaimed, the web, almost invisibly, was drawing around its first victim. Morning found Flaxborough air thick with the consequences of yesterday's events. The first edition of the Gazette, only halfway through the press run, had already swapped headlines twice by breakfast. Tulip Tangle Shockstown was the favourite, narrowly besting prize mishap Mars Market Raffle. At the Old Bull and Vine, talk clustered as tightly as the smoke. The scandal, with its odd bouquet of missing tickets, stray petals, and secretive bottles, grew wilder by the retelling. Inspector Purbright was rarely early, but that morning he strolled the high street as the postman distributed worries and bills. He had a knack for appearing both part of the scenery and a quiet disruption of it, greeting all with an absent-minded gravity that invited further confession. Sergeant Love, prompt and square-shouldered, joined him outside Pettiford's grocer. The constable bore 2 additions, a list of basket donors and a sour, sleepless expression. "I've drawn up the names, sir," Love announced, tapping the paper, as though it might spring to life. "Mrs. Rumsey, committee member, Mrs. Folly, entrant, Mrs. Grethenow, no relation, but persistent participant, and Mr. Hollett, new, this year. Would you like to begin at the top?" Purbright accepted the list with a gentle nod. "Let us," he said, "move quietly among the petals." They found Mrs. Greta in her immaculate front garden, resplendent in a pastel pinny, dead-heading narcissi with a pincer's efficiency. Her face, broad and pleasant, acquired a cloud when the subject of the raffle arose. "My tulips weren't even considered," she sniffed, snipping at the air. I saw Rumsey push them behind her own, plain as day. Favoritism, if you ask me. Not that I object to Mrs. Foley, she's suffered her share. But Rumsey always tells this committee that she needs to be taken down a peg. I'll say that she fiddled with the arrangements after the ticket sheets came out, sticking a yellow when I'd only bred reds. Purbright regarded her roses, then said mildly, "Did you attend the whole raffle?" "Left before the draw," she replied, "because one's dignity must have limits. Came back for my coat, saw Rumsey, saw the mayor, saw Scrum with the tickets. Who else was around? All of them, and Pettiford too, lurking near the cordial, by the by." Love scribbled, suspicious of anyone who used the word lurking before 9:30. Their next call was Mrs. Foley, who, after yesterday's upheaval, was still aggrieved, but now seemed to savour it. "Inspectors!" "More investigation?" she fussed, showing off the stub once more. "I tell you, nobody can account for the numbers except Rumsey." And Pettiford was miffed. His tulips were snubbed. As to the cordial, well, that didn't come from my table. I only entered flowers, not sentimental trinkets. "Did you see the mayor handling anything?" Purbright asked. "Oh yes, always hovering, trying to make himself useful." "If by useful you mean interfering. He has a way of fussing when nobody asks him." They pressed on to Pettiford, whose grocer's shelves were stacked meticulously enough to shame any commissioner. He greeted the officers with a wry, if guarded, smile. "If you've come about the raffle, I've nothing to add but this. Some people care more for position than honesty," he muttered, stacking tins with unnecessary force. "I saw the mayor handling tickets, saw Rumsey rearrange baskets. I told you before, flowers aren't the only things being swapped. Did you happen to notice anyone else near the cordial?" Love ventured. Pettiford considered. "Hollett brought a flask, but whether that was for himself or sabotage I couldn't say. Council likes to pretend cordial is tradition, but it's a new fig leaf for their prudery." Leaving the shop, Purbright mused, "Interesting how much can be hidden in plain view behind a drink." The mention of Hollett drew them toward the allotments, where the man himself wrestled with early beans and an over-ambitious wheelbarrow. Hollett was young by Flaxborough standards, late 30s, with that unaccustomed look that marked him as incompletely assimilated. "I don't know what everyone's carrying on about," he said, as he wiped mud from his hands. "I only joined to meet people, donated a plain basket of tulips, nothing flashy, didn't linger at the draw. That cordial wasn't mine, I don't even drink the stuff." Love eyed the haphazard crate of tools at Hollett's feet. "You left after setting your basket?" "Straight home," Hollett said, but saw the mayor arguing with Mr. Hobb in the car park. Something about forms. And Mrs. Rumsey, who was running between the hall and her car, looked very flustered. As the constables walked back toward the market hall, news arrived of a development. Elsie Barrow, dogged as a woodpecker, intercepted them by Mrs. Beasley's postbox. "It's happened, Inspector. They found the missing ticket in the waste at the Old Bull and Vine behind the bar mirror. The landlord says it has been there since last night, and no one claims to have seen it before. The market hall's caretaker, summoned and famished for action, agreed to let them in. Love carefully retrieved the raffle ticket from a jam jar atop a shelf, ticket 143, torn askew but unmistakable. Purbright examined it with silent intent. The stub's numbers matched the others, but the paper's corner bore a sticky, sweet-smelling residue. Cordial, perhaps, or something stronger. The news of the found ticket moved through Flaxborough in minutes, trailing enrichment and injury in equal measure. At the Old Bull and Vine, the treasurer, Mr. Hobb, was heard exclaiming, "Well, that's one scandal resolved." But elsewhere the gossips disagreed. If a ticket could vanish and reappear, what else might surface? Theories seethed. Some asserted Mrs. Rumsey planted it to throw off suspicion. Others claimed Pettiford, sour about prizes, had pocketed it and lost his nerve. Mrs. Greta gave an impromptu speech at the bakery, declaring the whole committee stained by petty ambitions. Back at the market hall, Purbright choreographed a slow circuit of the scene. He paused near the place where the yellow petal had lain, now freshly swept. He flicked a thoughtful look at the table's leg, where the yellow smudge yet lingered. Passing the prize display, he drifted toward the remaining baskets, scanning for telltale petals, red, white, or yellow. A quiet hum of voices rose as the first of the week's council meetings assembled in an adjoining room. Mrs. Rumsey arrived with her committee papers, guarded but determined. Mr. Hobb pursued her with a caustic aside about record-keeping, and Pettiford hovered at the fringe, ears twitching. It was in this atmosphere, a blend of florid accusation and oppressive decorum, that the next public mishap cracked the case open. The Raffle's replacement draw, designed to restore dignity, was scheduled. All parties were present. The mayor made a great show of impartiality, calling each number with pomp. But when the final prize, a modest chocolate box, was about to be awarded, the envelope Mrs. Rumsey had guarded so assiduously fell to the floor, splitting open. A folded letter marked "strictly private" in her hand slid into view. All eyes froze as the mayor, bending to help, blanched and pulled back his hand as if scorched. There on the paper, plainly visible to all, was a typed list, suggested winners, spring raffle. Names, prizes, ticket numbers, some matched the day's outcomes, others did not. Next to Mrs. Fawley's name, in careful script, someone had crossed out 147 and written 144. The crowd erupted in hisses and sharp titters. Mrs. Rumsey, mortified, tried to snatch back the letter. Mr. Hobb declared, "This is irregular conduct," while Mrs. Fawley muttered triumphantly, "I suspected as much." Inspector Purbright, unfazed, stepped forward and contemplated the gathering storm. His gaze drifted from Mrs. Rumsey to the mayor, to the unclaimed bottle of cordial, and back to the smudge on the table leg. Connections coiled, unseen by all but him. The council meeting was abandoned, decorum lost for the day. The letter's contents, though sensational, raised more questions than answers. The crooked raffle was now officially a town matter, and every citizen with a grievance sensed an opportunity. As Sergeant Love swept up the spilled envelopes, petals, and egos, Purbright wondered aloud, "Some truths, Sergeant, are arranged with more care than any tulip." Flaxborough, knowing trouble when he saw it, braced himself for the next bloom of scandal. The reverberations of Mrs. Rumsey's opened envelope extended into Flaxborough's afternoon with the persistence of a church bell rung by accident. The market hall, so recently a battleground of floral decorum, was now dense with rumour and accusation. Whispers burrowed along the corridor, through the bakery queue, and even into the hushed sacristy, where Reverend Small's calls for additional prayer were met with muffled giggles from behind hymnals. Inspector Purbright observed all movement with the silent patience of a botanist waiting for an awkward species to reveal its nature. The woman typed suggested winners list, barely dry from yesterday's committee typewriter, challenged every notion of fairness the town held dear. It was a document weighted not merely with scandal, but with the subtle power struggles that had always underpinned the spring raffle. Mrs. Rumsey retreated behind her committee papers, face set in lines of mortification and defiance. The mayor rang the council bell, summoning those most desperate to distance themselves from the controversy. Sergeant Love, ever reliable, stationed himself outside the market hall, notebook at the ready, and optimism undiminished by recent events. A slow parade of suspects filed past, each self-consciously tidier than usual, prepared to defend wounded reputations. Mrs. Foley, newly reassured in her suspicions, aired her theories to any congregant likely to listen. They've always favoured their own. My name is crossed out. That's proof, if ever there was. Mr. Hobb, reluctant among chaos, explained to Purbright. She used to sort tickets by colour, reds for regulars, blues for committee. Now it's all digital, or meant to be. Tradition doesn't hold when the committee changes hands. In the garden behind the hall, Mrs. Greta and Mr. Pettiford engaged in a brisk exchange, not quite arguing about who first noticed the envelope drop and what truly counted as tampering. Pettiford insisted, "It's all about position, Greta. If you stand nearest the committee, you control the flow." Mrs. Greta, never one to lose a quarrel by lack of vigour, retorted, "You simply resent that the flowers upstage your groceries." Purbright, his presence neither announced nor unmissed, allowed these outpourings to build toward their own crescendo. At intervals he leaned on banisters or window ledges, quietly taking the measure of each speaker as if attending a funeral for something more delicate than honesty. Meanwhile, Sergeant Love canvassed the crowd with fresh purpose, tracing the journey of the winning tickets and the handwritten amendments. Mrs. Beasley, previously anxious, now found herself emboldened. I saw Mrs. Rumsey in the cloakroom with an envelope before the drawer. She was talking quietly with Mr. Hollett. Raised voices, then laughter, then silence. No one else is nearby unless you count the caretakers gathering chairs. Love pressed, "Could you hear anything?" Mrs. Beasley hesitated. "Something about fairness," Hollett said. "Not worth the fuss." Rumsey replied, "Best to keep order." Sounded like they'd argued, but she ended with that laugh, the high one she uses when she's flustered. Church bells marked the hour, sending polite flurries toward tea rooms and the vicar's study. In every corner, townsfolk dissected the meaning of lists, amendments, and that persistent yellow stain, each detail growing more tangled with the retelling. Purbright gathered council minutes and old Raffle records, quietly surveying the difference between intention and outcome. He noticed, with some amusement, that last year's double-entry scandal listed Mrs. Foley as both winner and runner-up, both times for flowers she claimed she never grew. Mid-afternoon brought new drama. The Spring Fete Committee arrived to inspect the market hall for next season's event, and in the confusion of rearranged chairs and misplaced bunting, a second set piece unfolded. Mrs. Greta's tulip basket was found missing from the displays, replaced with Pettiford's unobtrusive crate of groceries. The basket was discovered moments later in the broom cupboard, petals wilted but intact. Mrs. Greta howled that this was deliberate sabotage, while Pettiford implored, "Why would I swap a basket for onions?" Pure nonsense. The crowd, ever greedy for scandal, swelled around the scene. Young Hollett reappeared, face pale under garden dirt, and protested he'd only helped stack chairs. "I haven't touched a tulip since Monday," he declared, provoking a snort of disbelief from Mrs. Rumsey. Purbright signalled for quiet. He addressed Hollett. "Was anyone with you in the storage area?" Hollett blinked. "Just Mrs. Beasley, and she left quickly. There was a clang basket that hit the floor, but I didn't see who left it." Pettiford was outside, grumbling about missing tins. Love, faithful to routine, inspected the cupboard. Inside the broom handle hung a yellow petal, matching precisely the one seen near the prize table days ago. Purbright, gently brushing it with his handkerchief, observed, "An orphan petal struggles to find a home among so many baskets, Sergeant." Council members, feeling threatened, took refuge in bureaucracy. The mayor announced an independent audit of the raffle, and Mr. Hobb began a checklist of ticket stubs stretched across 2 tables. Mrs. Rumsey, cornered, insisted the list was for reference. No one ever followed it exactly. The mayor edited things every year. Hobb nearly choked on his tea. "I've never touched a list in my life. Through it all, Flaxborough's gossip machine accelerated. Mrs. Greta claimed revenge for last year's runner-up. Pettiford muttered about council conspiracies, and Mrs. Beasley suggested all baskets should be subject to compulsory photographic evidence. Elsie Barrow drifted between groups, documenting grievances as though she anticipated a chapter in the next council memoir. Just when the tension peaked, the church verger entered, waving a recently altered hymn board. "Who changed today's number?" he demanded. Someone replaced "Morning has broken" with "Lead us, O Lord. I never authorized it." The townsfolk froze, sharp-eyed. The alteration, though seemingly minor, landed with the weight of wider meaning, another sign of petty subversion, another clue in the mounting tally. Purbright observed the board with slow attention. Sometimes a hymn out of place signals more than a lapse in musical taste, he noted, which sent Mrs. Beasley into a new fever of conjecture about coded messages. Evening descended, and as folk trickled home, shop windows glowed with anticipation of the next day's stories. Purbright lingered by the market hall entrance, his silence thicker than the drizzle settling on cobbles. Love, gathering stray raffle papers, commented, "Suppose this all comes down to a mistake, sir? All this fuss, does it really matter for a few tulips?" Purbright, peering into the dim hall, replied, "Mistakes, Sergeant, rarely travel alone, especially in towns as careful as Flaxborough." A second public disruption had blossomed, baskets swapped, hymn boards altered, lists uncovered, and everywhere the yellow petal thread that stitched the town together in suspicion. The investigation, now more tangled than ever, pressed onward. Flaxborough's facades, market, church and council, stood quietly, keeping their secrets. Enough scandal had surged through to ensure no one would sleep entirely soundly. Even with night's hush settled thick over Flaxborough, little true quiet was to be had. Beneath windows fluttering with net curtains and behind hedges pruned with anxious precision, households traded speculation as if it were winter preserves. The affair was no longer simply the tulip debacle, but was now ominously evoked as the incident which seeped into spoken routines, raffle schemes, choir sabotage, missing tickets, and petals consistently yellow. If anyone in town managed sleep, it was only the deep, undisturbed slumber of conviction that their own hands were clean. Inspector Purbright, for his part, spent the first hours after sunset, reviewing notes in a lamplit haze. Sentence by sentence, he reordered events, the original tulip upset, the missing ticket and its curious sweet residue, the list unearthed from Mrs. Rumsey's envelope, the basket found wilted but whole in a broom cupboard, and now the church's hymn board, slyly amended. To the inspector the outline of the web was clearer. What remained murky was not the who, but the why, and what, if anything, bound so many minor subversions together. Morning brought a fresh flurry of activity and a new anxiety to the market square. Sergeant Love reported that Mrs. Folly had turned up at the station, cheeks flushed and voice quaking. "Inspector, it's Mrs. Rumsey," Love began. "She's outside insisting she must clear her name before the council meets." The inspector nodded. He'd anticipated such a development. Flaxborough's tendency to preemptively admit or accuse had, over the years, allowed many to sidestep actual guilt through sheer force of character. Mrs. Rumsey strode in, clutching a dog-eared committee folder and a plastic-wrapped tulip stem. "I need to speak, Inspector. I am not responsible for this misfortune," she blurted, voice clipped but trembling. "My envelope was meant for reference, not dictation. The list, I draft one every year, sometimes before the draw, simply to avoid awkwardness. I never alter tickets, and I can swear before the vicar on that." Sergeant Love, eager to be helpful, arranged his notebook. "But your list included hand amendments, Mrs. Rumsey?" She nodded, swallowing. "Yes, but only after Mrs. Fawley called out 144 instead of 147. I added her to the winners after the draw, not before. The committee expects a certain order. The mayor likes names to circulate. Sometimes tickets are lost or changed." Purbright remained still. "Did the mayor instruct you to change anything this year?" A quick shake of the head. "No, Inspector. He only requests the final winners. I'm certain someone swapped tickets during the event." I saw Mr. Pettiford linger by the entries, picking at the baskets, as if surveying his stock. Purbright watched her fingers nervously twist the tulip stem. "Did you handle the entries or prizes after the draw?" "Only to tidy them. My own basket was left untouched. I suspect, I shouldn't say it. Mrs. Greta made a point of leaving early, but she returned for her coat after the commotion. I found a yellow petal on my seat moments later." A silence fell ripe, but not yet ripe enough. Love scribbled Rumsey tidies, Greta turns, and Pettiford lingers. At that very hour the council convened. Tensions, honed to a fine edge, found release as the mayor announced, "We have a suspect in the recent Raffle disorder." Mrs. Rumsey's list, while regrettable, cannot alone explain the missing ticket and prize confusion. We are compelled by order and tradition to request Mr. Pettiford's account. Murmurs buzzed in the assembly's corners, and Pettiford, whose visage usually projected dignified resignation, paled and bristled. Summoned to the Market Hall office, he arrived grim but resolute. "I have been wrongly accused," he declared, voice rising so all council could hear through open doors. "My only business with the baskets was as a donor. I helped set out groceries, as I do every year. Yes, I checked ticket show else to verify the count. I did not swap, change, or misplace a single stub. If anyone altered tickets, it was either the mayor or Mrs. Greta, whose runner-up moping grows tiresome." Mrs. Greta stormed in, her usual calm, scattered. "If you suspect me, look at my basket. It's been molested twice. Tulips wilted, petals moved. Pettiford handles everything, always lingering, always muttering." The mayor, eager for resolution, proclaimed, "Let's establish facts. Who saw the missing ticket 143 before the raffle? Who handled it after?" Silence thickened. Mrs. Beasley, shaking slightly, whispered, "I saw it stuck to the cordial bottle, but I didn't mention it. I thought it was a joke." Eyes narrowed. The cordial, fast becoming a symbol, appeared again in stories unclaimed, yet handled by too many. Purbright asked gently, "Did anyone remark on the bottle before the draw?" Mrs. Beasley nodded. "Mr. Hollett helped me move the baskets. He handed me the cordial." "Odd, really. He seemed nervous, sniffing his hands after remarking it smelled like spring." The circle of accusation narrowed to Pettiford, Greta, Rumsey, and Hollett. Yet outside, in the square, the gossip persisted. Elsie Barrow told all who'd listen that the scandal had exposed Pettiford at last, while the verger muttered about strange goings-on in cupboard corners. At the Bull and Vine, young Hollett was seen nursing a pint, ears burning under hushed commentary.
Sergeant Love, as ever, compiled evidence with the diligence of a diligent bee. "Isn't it odd, sir," he reflected, "how everyone's baskets seem touched, but nobody saw the touching?" Purbright considered the mess. The evidence, if interpreted by the dogged optics of Flaxborough, pointed squarely at Pettiford. He'd lingered, he'd muttered, and he'd checked. His name spun fastest against the current, and in a town that moved toward comfort and conformity, his selection as culprit seemed almost inevitable. Mid-afternoon, the council put forward a formal statement. "Mr. Pettiford's handling of baskets and tickets has brought disrepute to the annual raffle, and pending full investigation, he is to be suspended from all future committee duties pending inquiry." The press, not missing a beat, prepared their next headline. Pettiford himself, stoic but splintering, stood outside the grocer's, assuring Mrs. Greta and Elsie Barrow, "I did not swap a thing. Their accusations will come to nothing. People know my honesty." Elsie's dog sniffed at his shoes as if seeking direct evidence. Through it all, Purbright remained composed and attentive, but never complicit in the rush to judgment. As dusk edged into town, the inspector lingered beneath the market hall portico, listening to the babble of consequence. Suspicion blanketed Pettiford, while the others, Rumsey, Greta, and Hollett, dodged further scrutiny. The yellow petal, now less a clue than a motif, hovered in memory. Purbright left the scene with gentle certainty. The story of Pettiford's supposed guilt, the town's preference for a quick culprit, was both the expected path and, he suspected, a cleverly arranged blind. The case, wrapped in neat accusations and tidy council minutes, was only just unfolding its petals. The official censure of Mr. Pettiford gave Flaxborough a temporary sense of justice. Committee members moved with restored confidence, and gossip, newly emboldened, curled round the market stalls like frost. By breakfast, the phrase committee suspension had become a polite substitute for blunter assessments, and some in town began to treat Pettiford's groceries with a wary distance, as if turnips might carry the whiff of misdemeanour. But in the quiet where true events knit themselves together, suspicion and relief proved only seasonal companions. Inspector Purbright, nearly invisible among the morning errands, noted an increase in nervous glances and lessened laughter between rivals. A mild drizzle peppered the cobbles, giving not quite a reason for umbrellas, but offering cover for furtive conversations beneath the butcher's awning and outside the post
Office. Sergeant Love, gathering fragments from the week's cauldron, was greeted sometimes coolly, sometimes with rehearsed warmth, by citizens eager to affirm their own innocence. Though Pettiford's guilt had quickly settled over the town, Purbright's attention drifted elsewhere. The day's tension leapt a notch with the arrival of the Spring Fete Committee's public inspection. Flags, bunting, and baskets once more arranged in mock festivity drew a crowd back to the scene of confusion. Mrs. Greta, feisty in a fresh tulip print, patrolled the displays for sabotage, while Mrs. Rumsey, resolved to regain poise, announced loudly that committee business will not be stifled by misadventure. Mr. Hollett, face drawn and taciturn, pressed himself into quiet corners, eyes darting. Just as the council convened for the promised audit, a muted commotion rose outside the market hall. Reverend Small, flushed and aghast, arrived clutching the church hymn board. The number had again changed, this time to 42, which, as the vicar fretted, means nothing liturgical and little consoling. The assembled crowd exchanged dark looks, and Mrs. Beasley said, "That's not a hymn, that's a signal." Speculation, wild, absurd, broke like waves. In the face of this new scandal, Purbright requested the board and fingered the edge where an oily mark reached toward the corner. Beside it, smudged but visible, lay a faint trace of yellow. "It appears," Purbright murmured, "that someone wishes very much to be remembered." His observation was met with bafflement that concealed unease. Sergeant Love, summoned inside by a harried Mrs. Rumsey, struggled to keep order as the committee argued through the logistics of basket displays and audit forms. Mrs. Greta, who never missed an opportunity for melodrama, exclaimed, "My basket again, petals rearranged, onions touched." "Is this personal, Inspector?" Purbright replied in a measured tone. "Almost everything here seems personal, Mrs. Greta. That is Flaxborough's charm." The committee's squabbles provided a backdrop for sharper developments. Council records of prior raffles, fetched by Love from the archives, revealed a familiar pattern, a recurring anomaly in basket placements and ticket records. Each year, one basket always prepared by a non-committee member was shifted zones last minute, often resulting in an unexpected runner-up. In years where the mayor presided directly, incidents spiked. In others, Mrs. Rumsey's lists appeared to have been referenced for gentle suggestions. Flaxborough's penchant for small misdirection was as persistent as its taste for sponge cake. Mid-morning brought unexpected drama. The doors to the market hall swung wide and Pettiford himself barged in, a man determined not just to clear his name, but to prove he'd been victimized as much as accused. "I demand a hearing," he announced to the gathered committee, brandishing his own pristine ticket booklet. "I did not touch that missing ticket, the bottle perhaps. I claim ignorance beyond dull tradition. If anyone's sabotaged a raffle, it's someone with more to gain." The mayor, eyes narrowed, replied, "Your presence at every committee event speaks for itself. Surely, Inspector, you see the significance." Purbright met Pettiford's gaze. "Significance, sir, often grows with repetition, yet repetition itself does not create guilt." The committee buzzed, some satisfied, others discomfited. Before Pettiford could protest further, Mr. Hollett, with a nervous tic, excused himself, muttering about errands. Love, attentive as ever, followed discreetly. He returned minutes later. He was overheard telling Mrs. Beasley, "It's become more than I meant. I just wanted to help, not to win anything." Mrs. Beasley wonders if he's hiding something, sir. "You've seen him handle baskets?" Purbright inquired. "Twice, sir, both times when Mrs. Rumsey and Greta were preoccupied." He seemed to linger, then withdrew. As the committee returned to business, mostly chaos, Elsie Barrow delivered new fuel. "The mayor has a stack of private notes. I caught him paging through them before the audit, muttering raffle numbers. He's always got extra envelopes, Inspector, planning for something if you ask me." The mayor, confronted by Purbright, tried humour. "Oh, Elsie's too keen. I keep notes to prevent confusion, not create it. If baskets move, it's for symmetry. Flaxborough prizes harmony, even in misfortune." Outside, among the spilled petals and bunting, Love discovered a small clutch of raffle stubs left unsorted, a single stub marked with a faint cross, and beneath it a small petal glued in place. The cross was identical to those found on Mrs. Rumsey's reference list, and the petal was nearly perfect, in yellow. Purbright called the council together. One ticket marked, one petal glued, a hymn board changed twice, and baskets displaced. Too much coincidence for comfort. Mrs. Rumsey, pale again, admitted, "I do keep extra petals for touch-ups, but I'd never glue one to a ticket." The mayor, now uneasy, stated, "Perhaps a prank, or a lesson." We have those with time on their hands. Elsie Barrow, who had seen everything twice, remarked, "Pranks in Flaxborough always turn up lessons, but the teacher isn't always found." As committee debate wound into confusion, accusations now circling Pettiford, Rumsey, and Hollett, the mayor's sudden interruption claimed all attention. Sergeant Love, red-faced, entered with urgent news. "Inspector, it's Mrs. Greta's greenhouse. Someone's broken in. Tulips everywhere, yellow petals scattered, ticket stubs pasted to glass." The crowd rushed, scandal and motive recharged. The greenhouse was chaos, toppled pots and petals artfully strewn, on every surface, substituted and unarranged in a strange spiral beneath the window. Mrs. Greta wailed, "Who would do such a thing?" And why the tickets? The town's hunger for answers sharpened to desperation. Inspector Purbright quietly surveyed the vandalism. The marked spiral and the glued petals pointed less to anger and more to performance. Amid the detritus, the inspector retrieved a small typewritten note stuck to a pot. Harmony restored in confusion. He pocketed the note, holding silence. Something choreographed was unfolding, and someone, perhaps not the suspended Pettiford, nor the embattled Rumsey, was writing a narrative behind each event. Within the hour, the town reeled from public disruption number 2, the greenhouse defacement, the spiral of stubs, and the enigmatic message. Pettiford, Rumsey, Greta, and Hollertall, now tainted by suspicion, drifted homeward beneath thin rain, their motives as muddled as the petals on glass. As dusk fell again, Flaxborough's mystery grew richer, its wounds deeper, and Inspector Purbright's quiet certainty fed a tension that would soon demand resolution. The greenhouse affair lit Flaxborough with renewed intensity, drawing attention not just to Mrs. Greta's tulips, but to every thread of rivalry and grievance the spring raffle had untangled. By midday, children lingered at the garden gate, marvelling at the spiral of tickets glued to glass, while adults less impressed by artistry huddled over teapots in pursuit of the vandal's intent. The mystery of the phrase "harmony restored in confusion" scented every conversation as townsfolk rehearsed theories and clung to old certainties in vain. Inspector Purbright paced the sodden garden with the unobtrusive efficiency of a man who found order in the aftermath. He traced the spiral, examining the placement of stubs that migrated from every suspect's allotment. The glued patchwork of cordial stickiness and clear paste suggested both calculation and whimsy. At one corner, near a fallen watering can, Purbright noted a cluster of yellow petals shaped almost like a question mark. Their order spoke less of accident than design. Mrs. Greta, caught between outrage and embarrassment, refused briskly to believe herself a target. "I've never seen such a performance. The person responsible isn't simply cross, they enjoy their own cleverness." Mrs. Rumsey, summoned in her gardening gloves, agreed, but angled suspicion. "I wouldn't put anything past Pettiford. He knows how to make a spectacle seem accidental. Of course, young Hollets are always fiddling near the sheds after dusk." Pettiford arrived indignant. "I have an alibi, Inspector. I was restocking shelves. The only thing I glue is old labels." If Greta wants to blame someone, let her check council storage. Half the town parades through there looking for misplaced things. Sergeant Love, meanwhile, devoted the morning to patient review. He logged every ticket stub's serial number, comparing those from Greta's greenhouse to those left unsorted near the market hall. A pattern, faint but discernible, emerged. Certain stubs matched baskets that received last-minute adjustments, petals replaced, baskets shifted, and arrangements altered. The careful way some tickets were glued sideways, upside down with tiny crosses, echoed Rumsey's habits but teased with ambiguity. It was Elsie Barrow, armed with the sharpness only a lifetime among Flaxborough's secrets could bestow, who delivered the day's next complication. She brought from her cousin's dustbin behind the Bull and Vine a damp bundle of correspondence no longer fit for secrecy. In it there are council notes, half-complete lists of prize assignments, and a torn letter bearing the mayor's signature, all dated before the incident. "Someone wants confusion," Inspector Elsie announced. "Someone who likes loose ends." Purbright, appreciating both the evidence and Elsie's flair, sifted through the notes. Many referenced harmony basket placement, ticket order, and flower colour, always with suggestions rather than instructions. The mayor's letter seemed to urge restraint, yet it was annotated with quick, angular corrections. If in doubt, refer to Mrs. Rumsey, favour tradition, suppress dissent. The council, pressed to act, met under strained civility. The mayor, no longer breezy but vaguely harassed, offered a statement to Purbright and Sergeant Love. Our priority is peace. Pettiford may have erred in procedure, but not, I warrant, in malice. The real culprit enjoys disruption. I urge all to re-examine assumptions. Mrs. Rumsey, put on defensive, clarified. The committee selects baskets by consensus. Sometimes chaos ensues, but no one, not even the mayor, alters tickets alone. That spiral in Greta's greenhouse is a message that looks wider. At the heart of the day's tension lay Hollett, conspicuous in his absence. Love tracked his movements to the far side of Flaxborough, onto allotments fringed with brambles and suspicion. Hollett, pale but forthright, stammered that he'd spent the morning unearthing weeds, nothing more. Love, finding his hands stained with yellow pollen, raised an eyebrow. "You're among the last to handle petals, Mr. Hollett. Can you account for them all?" Hollett shook his head. "No, I help when asked. But the baskets are committee property. Pettiford's the one who scolds me for being too enthusiastic. Besides, everyone treats me as if I might upset the flowers, never the harmony." Returning to Market Hall, Purbright allowed himself a gentle smile. The clues, a yellow petal by the hymn-board, sticky tickets, secret notes, and Hollett's pollen-stained hands, presented themselves with almost comic clarity, if one cared to assemble them. What remained unclear was the motive. What satisfaction would anyone derive from such an intricate chaos of sabotage, artistry, and accusation? The council reconvened, tempers too frayed to manage basic protocol. Mrs. Greta accused the mayor of complicity. Pettiford accused Greta of melodrama. Hollett was left to defend himself without conviction. Elsie Barrow, uninvited but unavoidable, sat in the back row, jotting names and whispered remarks. Outside, the rain doubled its pace, dripping from the market hall's eaves, masking every footstep in the garden. Inside, Purbright conducted his own audit, not of lists and baskets, but of glances, interruptions, and hurried withdrawals. Suspicion waxed and waned among suspects, while the chorus of ordinary townsfolk insisted no one in Flaxborough could be capable of such orchestrated mischief. In late afternoon, the tension dispersed for a moment. Mrs. Beasley and the verger entered with tea and barely disguised intrigue. "I brought 3 cups, Inspector." Odd number, I know, but one outside. The rain doubled its pace, dripping from the market hall's eaves, masking every footstep in the garden. Inside, Purbright conducted his own audit, not of lists and baskets, but of glances, interruptions, and hurried withdrawals. Suspicion waxed and waned among suspects, while the chorus of ordinary townsfolk insisted no one in Flaxborough could be capable of such orchestrated mischief. In late afternoon, the tension dispersed for a moment. Mrs. Beasley and the verger entered with tea and barely disguised intrigue. "I brought 3 cups, Inspector. Odd number, I know, but one always seems left over." Purbright smiled, noticing again the town's habit of arranging for the extra, for the possibility, for the outlier. As the sun eased behind clouds, Love presented a summary of basket and ticket movements. "Every suspect has handled something at odds with their role, sir. But they're all careful, almost rehearsing. Why take such trouble unless the confusion itself was the goal?" "Perhaps," Sergeant Purbright replied. "Some in Flaxborough prefer their order in loops and spirals, not straight lines. Left over." Purbright smiled, noticing again the town's habit of arranging for the extra, for the possibility, for the outlier. As the sun eased behind clouds, Love presented a summary of basket and ticket movements. "Every suspect has handled something at odds with their role, sir. But they're all careful, almost rehearsing. Why take such trouble unless the confusion itself was the goal?" "Perhaps," Sergeant Purbright replied. Some in Flaxborough prefer their order in loops and spirals, not straight lines. Nightfall gathered, leaving the town taut with uncertainty, each faction poised for accusation, yet uncertain which flower to blame. One more scandal, it seemed, was always possible, and suspicion now circled Hollett, the mayor, and even Mrs. Greta herself. The spiral in the greenhouse, the sticky tickets, and the constant march of misplaced petals pointed away from Pettiford toward motives entwined in reputation, defiance, and restless wit. As the church bell rang once for an hour, the inspector prepared for the next event, sure that someone, soon, would misstep and reveal not just their guilt, but also their method. If the spiral of petals and tickets in Mrs. Greta's greenhouse had left Flaxborough drop-jawed, the motives behind such artistry kept every kettle simmering and every tongue wagging well past midnight. Dawning hours found Inspector Purbright settled behind the market hall's window, watching a world where order was more often declared than achieved. Sergeant Love, loyal and undaunted by gossip's tide, sorted through evidence in the corner with almost ecclesiastical focus. Each suspect nursed their own version of events. The mayor reasserted harmony at every public opportunity, reciting platitudes about community spirit in a tone that managed to sound both soothing and faintly accusatory. Mrs. Rumsey, her civic pride dented but not defeated, had recruited Mrs. Beasley and Elsie Barrow into a makeshift defence league, circulating old committee minutes and recipes for fruitcake in the hope that distraction might cleanse reputations as much as tea. Mr. Pettiford, excluded for the nonce from committee affairs, hovered around his shop's vegetable displays with a dignity both misplaced and fiercely protected. Hollett, whose involvement remained more atmospheric than decisive, grew paler by the morning as rumours swelled and wilted about him like ill-watered tulips. The council's audit pressed on. Church and market, committee and public tangled themselves in each other's stories until a timeline of sorts began to emerge. Mrs. Greta's disappearance from the scene just after the draw, Hollett's evasive gardening, and Rumsey's amendments and forgotten petals, each merged not just with the incident in the greenhouse, but with the original scandal of the missing ticket and sticky cordial. Purbright made his way around the square, quietly convening private interviews that rarely felt like interrogations. Mrs. Beasley, uneasy yet eager to please, shared her memory. "I took the baskets outside to air the tulips. Hollett helped. He said the petals were fine, but I saw him brush one off and pocket it. Said it looked out of place. He's a nice young man, Inspector, but I think he gets nervous." Elsie Barrow, never one to waste a piece of gossip, produced evidence with a kind of relish. Mrs. Rumsey's habit is to mark winners by colour, and Greta is famously touchy about anyone lifting a yellow from her patch. Pettiford leaves a paper trail wherever he walks, but Hollett rarely writes a thing. If you're searching for a method, try his boots, always covered in flower pulp after a scandal. Purbright, attentive as ever, took note. Everyone here seems invested not in winning, but in reputation. He allowed Mrs. Rumsey to recount her version of the committee's protocol, noticing the way her hand trembled at discussion of lists yet steadied for names. The mayor, meanwhile, rehearsed a speech about forgiveness and order, interrupted only by the arrival of Sergeant Love with a fresh batch of Raffle records and an accidental smear of yellow pollen on his cuff. Love's own record was a minor marvel. Every ticket movement, basket swap and floral theft was noted with care more rigorous than any council ledger. He summarized, "Missing tickets aren't random, sir. Each links to a person with motive, mostly small resentment over a lost prize, showmanship denied, or last year's quarrel revisited. Resentment over method is often more dangerous than resentment over outcome," reflected Purbright. "People forgive a loss, rarely a slight." Late morning brought a new twist when Mrs. Greta called a meeting in her front room, She demanded to know why her basket was targeted, insisting on presents from Purbright Love, Rumsey, Pettiford, Hollett, and the committee's diplomatic nod, Elsie Barrow, as the town's unofficial chronicler. Tea was poured, though few drank. The air bristled with accusation, but no open anger. "Someone wants me to know my tulips are not safe," Greta insisted. Petals glued, baskets moved, stubs marked. If it's a prank, it's a cruel one. Mrs. Rumsey admitted to making small repairs. Baskets wilt, petals fall. Sometimes we touch up displays for the judges, but sabotage? No, thank you. The mayor took on the tone of magnanimity. "We are all subject to Flaxborough's spirit, Mrs. Greta. The spring raffle matters, but it must not define us." Pettiford was more defensive than usual. I admit I checked ticket numbers, but only because last year's mess made me cautious. I never moved a petal. Hollett's mood was somewhere between contrition and confusion. I did pocket a petal once. I thought it might be lucky. But I left it on the market hall shelf. Anyone could have found it. Elsie Barrow, marshalling disclosure with the tact of a seasoned veteran, offered, "Seems to me most in Flaxborough could move a petal, mark a ticket, or drop a note." The motive isn't injury, it's recognition. Everyone here knows what it means to be left out. Inspector Purbright refrained from direct judgment, inviting silence to make its own argument. Each person present, he observed, danced on the edge of guilt, propelled more by desperation to defend than desire to harm. As the meeting closed, Elsie muttered to Love, "It's got to come out soon, Sergeant. You can't glue petals to suspicion forever." Love blinked, doodling spirals in his notebook. "No, Miss Barrow, but you can try." Outside, Flaxborough wore an air of anticipation. At the library, the scandal displaced local history as preferred reading. At the tobacconist, gossip outstripped tobacco sales. At the church, hymns were hummed with an undercurrent of inquiry. Inspector Purbright paused at the market hall, inspecting the place where the yellow petal had first appeared, then again at the greenhouse, the spiral on glass echoing in his mind. Motives, old and new, pride, longing, and a hunger for the spotlight bloomed in every heart planted in Flaxborough's soil. He knew, as the next public disruption drew closer, that all that remained now was the right trigger, the right slip, and a flower in the wrong place. As the week turned, Flaxborough braced for the promised third scandal and the final unravelling of its orderly facade. Rumour had preceded certainty, as always, but now a sense of inevitability crept through the town's shop fronts and parishes. Inspector Purbright, quietly omnipresent, felt it in the way hands gripped teacups and eyes darted beyond the polite edge of conversation. Sergeant Love, grave and diligent, hovered close, convinced another minor disaster was poised to erupt. Morning began with an errand from the vicar, who asked Purbright if he might pass a reassuring eye over the church accounts, hinting at fears far older than the recent petal-based unrest. In fact, nearly every phone call to the station that day started or ended with a phrase about safety and the proper way of things. The Raffle had called every structure into doubt. By noon, Mrs. Rumsey announced a reconciliation tea for all involved parties, held at the market hall's faded drawing-room. Browning wallpaper, limp scones, and conversation soured by nervous laughter were the hallmarks of the event. Mrs. Rumsey presided, subtle as ever in her pursuit of peace, yet everyone understood this was more a peace offering to the town than to any particular neighbour. The gathering, watched from the window by Elsie Barrow and half the council, included Mrs. Greta with a bouquet that looked as if it might double as a shield, Pettiford, freshly pressed but still wounded, the mayor primed for magnanimity, Hollett tight-lipped, and Mrs. Beasley alternating between worry and curiosity. Even the vicar came, bearing the latest hymn board. It was during the polite hum of introductions that the third set piece shifted the course of the investigation once again. As Mrs. Rumsey poured teacher hand steady after a week of tremors, a sharp yelp rose from the far corner. Mrs. Beasley, reaching for a slice of fruitcake, had discovered her purse replaced by a packet of torn Raffle stubs, each marked with a russet cross, not unlike those seen glued in Greta's greenhouse. Gasps staggered the room as Mrs. Beasley unwrapped the packet. A yellow petal dropped, then another. Panic spiked, and accusations raced. It was not simply embarrassment. Now it was targeted, public, and unmistakably a message. Purbright leaned toward Sergeant Love. Curious how the right purse finds itself at the wrong table. Love, peering at the purse, which was unmistakably Beasley's, but the stubs inside all belonged to other contestants, none of whom were on the committee. Hollett, staring down at his cup, looked ready to bolt. Pettiford gripped his saucer so tightly Love feared a crockery disaster. For a moment the drawing-room became something older, a tribunal, a confessional, a stage. Mrs. Greta snapped, "Someone means to shame us all." "I never marked a ticket in my life." The mayor, struggling for command, intoned, "This must be the work of someone who yearns for attention, not justice." Purbright, serene, requested the packet. He inspected the cross, marks, russet, sticky, precise. Love checked the numbers. Each stub matched those from baskets either moved or interfered with during the spring raffle. Purbright's voice was low. "A thread, Sergeant, may appear tangled but run straight beneath the knots." Rumsey, sudden resolve flickering in her eyes, stated, "These crosses years ago, I helped the last committee chair sort stubs. We used wax crayons, always russet. It's a Flaxborough quirk, but this crayon is new." Elsie Barrow, pressing in at the threshold, snapped. "I saw Hollett buying crayons at Pettiford's on Tuesday. He said he wanted to brighten spring." Hollett finally breached, stammered, "I bought them for my niece. She likes to draw. I left them by the market hall after the tea. Anyone could have picked them up." Pettiford, flustered, asserted, "He lingers by the bins." If anyone knows how things go missing in Flaxborough, but his voice faltered under the weight of too much implication. A hush followed. Mrs. Beasley, usually overlooked, spoke with new clarity. "No one needs to win in Flaxborough, Inspector. They just need not to lose face." Purbright folded the packet and set it gently on the tea tray. A purse, swapped, not stolen. Raffle stubs marked and returned. Motives here turn on recognition, small victories, and whispered indignities. It seems the committee's tradition is not for harmony, but for motion choreography, not unlike petals scattered in the breeze. The room held its breath, time measured in the drip of distant rain against market hall glass. The mayor coughed. "Clearly we must report this latest disgrace." Sergeant Love, catching Purbright's eye, murmured, "Do you believe it's Hollett, sir?" Purbright answered softly, "I believe Flaxborough prefers circles to lines, Sergeant. Conclusions must not rush ahead of evidence." As the tea ended, Elsie Barrow fished a final item from her handbag, a note torn from a hymnal, reading, "Let order grow wild." She handed it to Purbright. The writing was careful and disguised, but the message could not be any clearer nor more Flaxborough. Outside, as the gathering dispersed into drizzly dusk, scandal and comedy had merged completely. The town's desire for both order and performance had now delivered not just one, but 3 public disruptions, and still the truth circled without landing. Purbright, undisturbed, watched it all with eyes trained on the next opportunity for a gentle test. The wet hush that followed Mrs. Rumsey's tea was the sort that Flaxborough reserved for those intervals when scandal crawled home to think about what it had done. Rain glossed the patched flagstones, washing away footprints, but not the residue of intrigue. Inspector Purbright made a slow circuit of the market hall, his gait as unhurried as a Sunday prelude. When he paused, it was always with the air of a man waiting for something inevitable, a word, a weather change, a misdirected glance. Sergeant Love, keen as ever to act, busied himself by the Raffle notice board. He sorted and resorted to the packet of marked stubs, his lips moving faintly as if rehearsing possible confessions. Per Purbright's suggestion, he made polite rounds at the library, Pettiford's shop, and the Old Bull and Vine. At each location, Love asked small questions. Has anyone seen the crayon? Were purses and notes sometimes misplaced? How well did people remember Hollett's niece, anyway? Meanwhile, Purbright arranged one last quiet gathering, not a formal inquiry, but a kind of resurrection of village life. A coffee hour at the church vestry, attended by all principals, as if for penance or confirmation. Rain softened to a drizzle, then to a hanging mist. One by one they arrived. Mrs. Grether with a tart smile, the Mayor brisk, Mrs. Beasley and Mrs. Rumsey together. Hollett followed by Elsie Barrow, who by now claimed the privilege of participant as much as witness, and Pettiford, not sulking but not above a performance of dignity either. Conversation began with weather, then migrated, as water must, to the lottery of baskets and accusations. Purbright settled the cup in his hands and remarked, quietly but audibly, "It's a curious thing how some flowers cannot be made to stay where they're put. Nor, it seems, can certain tickets or traditions." The others exchanged glances. Mrs. Greta bristled, but did not interrupt. Purbright continued. A petal swapped places, a ticket went rogue, and a purse found another's hands. Our search for the culprit has been much like the committee's raffles ordered on paper, chaotic in reality. He fixed his gaze, mild but indefatigable, on Hollett. "Perhaps you could tell us, Mr. Hollett, about those crayons. And that afternoon you spent arranging baskets for air. Did you notice anyone following you into the hall?" Hollett's hand trembled, rattling his teaspoon. "Yes, Inspector. Mrs. Rumsey was sorting lists. Mrs. Beasley was finding her coat, and I thought I saw well. I suppose I could be wrong. It all blurred. The crayons, they were for my niece, yes, but she's in Lincoln. I left them in my shed, and, well, it's not locked." Pettiford, unable to withhold commentary, muttered, "He leaves his nerve unlocked as well." It was a moment destined for Flaxborough. The Mayor, clearing his throat, sought to restore order. Mistakes have been made, petals misplaced. What counts is restoring confidence to the town. Purbright nodded as though conceding the point, then observed, "Odd about the cordial bottle in the first confusion, wasn't it?" Appearing among the tulips, sweet but unclaimed. Surely one must ask not just who brought it, but who needed it to be seen. A silence hung, deeper than before. Mrs. Beasley blushed. "I thought it was a raffle prize. Moved it to make room for baskets, but it smelled odd." Sergeant Love produced his notebook. "The sticky mark is on ticket 143, Inspector. Cordial, you think? And the same scent in Mrs. Greta's greenhouse where the spiral was made." Purbright's manner softened. It takes deliberation, not malice, to stitch so many small deceptions together. Flowers are moved, but always by those who want to be seen or not seen. Petals suggest intention, the stubs record method, and the cordial, well, the cordial is for the nerves, perhaps. He let the lull stretch, then leaned forward with gentle courtesy. "Might I ask, Mrs. Rumsey, if you recall seeing Hollett or Mrs. Grether carrying anything after the draw?" Or here the pause was surgical. "Did you, Hollett, ever notice a yellow petal stuck to your own shoe?" Hollett's face passed through confusion into something like relief, then, unexpectedly, laughter. "That's the funniest thing, Inspector. I did find a petal on my boot after helping Greta." I thought Mrs. Rumsey had left it. I put it behind the market hall. Maybe that's how it's spread." The mayor, seizing the moment, tried to close ranks. "There's enough confusion for 3 villages." "What is a single petal more?" But Purbright shook his head, his voice still soft. "It's never just a petal in Flaxborough, sir." He straightened the pile of stubs and looked along the table. Not a single act here was done out of greed or spite, perhaps pride, perhaps a touch of hope at worst, the wish to matter just a little more than last year. Someone found an expression in disruption, someone who knows the meaning of circles and harmony, who prefers a spiral to a line. He let this rest as thunder sounded far away, though few noticed it over the chorus of heartbeats and breath. As the gathering finished, Purbright made one last polite request. Could the owners of the marked Raffle stubs remain for a few words? Mrs. Greta, Pettiford, Hollett, and Mrs. Beasley stood, awkward but expectant. As the others drifted out into mist, Sergeant Love touched Purbright's sleeve. "Was that the test, sir?" For the first time, Purbright smiled. "A gentle one, Sergeant, but just bold enough. Tomorrow, after one final act, Flaxborough's tangled petals would be put right." The rain departed Flaxborough overnight, leaving behind a silvery brightness that polished the market hall's steps and gave every red, yellow, and white tulip a clarity of colour not seen since the day of the draw. There was a collective reluctance, almost embarrassment, in the town's heart as it returned to the scene. The market resumed its ancient complaints, the church restored its weekly routines, and even Elsie Barrow, chronicler of all scandals, felt the echo of laughter in her every retelling. But everyone knew something significant was yet to be resolved. Inspector Purbright called a final meeting not in the council chamber, nor anyone's parlour, but among the muddy flagstones at the market hall itself, beneath a makeshift table set with a single tulip from each basket, implicated in the week's confusion. The suspects arrived in pairs, each more subdued than the last. Mrs. Greta wore her most neutral pinny, and Pettiford his oldest jacket for
humility. Hollett, pale but composed, lingered at the edge, and Mrs. Beasley clutched her purse with the pride of a woman whose everyday possessions had twice become evidence. Mrs. Rumsey and the mayor joined at a distance, less part of the circle than its sentries. Flaxborough's ordinary citizens gathered at the fringe, no longer eager for a front-row spectacle, but resigned to the outcome. Elsie Barrow, notebook in hand, had taken up a seat on the market steps, ready to record but certain she already knew the story's shape. Purbright's inquiry was orderly. He opened with a gentle phrase. "We've witnessed 3 disruptions, each more imaginative than indignant. Raffle stubs marked and moved, baskets swapped and sabotaged, a greenhouse spiral, and at the heart of it all, the pursuit of harmony in confusion. Today we pieced together what these petals meant." Sergeant Love set the packet of marked stubs on the table beside the tangle of yellow petals. Purbright gestured toward them but did not touch. Each act, Purbright addressed the assembly, was meant not to hurt but to draw the eye, to call the town's attention to the pageantry itself. Our guilty party took care that every disruption was public, theatrical, and almost never irreversible. The missing ticket? Not stolen, but left to be found. The yellow petal? Never destroyed, simply highlighted. The cordial, the hymn board, and the marked purse each made the story rich and impossible to ignore. Mrs. Rumsey, voice tremulous, asked, "Then who wanted this?" "Nobody benefits," Purbright replied. "Someone who wanted Flaxborough to examine itself, not its winners. Reputation, kindness, and tradition. These are petals, easily bruised. Yet sometimes the whole basket is more beautiful for a little untidiness." He turned to Hollett, whose hands quivered at his side. Mr. Hollett, when you borrowed the crayon, rearranged the baskets, and replaced petals, was it to fix what was broken or to be remembered? Hollett shook his head. Not to be remembered. I tried to help. Greta always left baskets for airing. Pettiford said I was too eager. I wanted to make things tidy after last year's mix-up. The petals stuck on my shoe felt lucky, but someone else must have taken the idea further. I never meant for it all to escalate. Indeed, Purbright nodded kindly, but each act was designed to be found, its author disguised by others' habits. The true architect needed accomplices only in blindness. He lifted a spiral of tickets, their crosses russet and petals glued with cordial's residue. This spiral wasn't vandalism, it was an invitation, a request for the town to look closer at how its traditions were kept. The culprit hid among those most involved and most trusted, belonging everywhere and nowhere at once. Sergeant Love, puzzled but trusting, asked, "There were so many motives, sir." Pettiford's bruised dignity, Greta's pride, Rumsey's list. Was it only one person? Purbright's answer was soft, almost private. No, Sergeant. It was all of us in small ways, but the maestro was one who thrives on loops, who prefers performance to result, who draws circles, not edges. Flaxborough's scandals are as circular as its gossip. He paused, and every ear strained. The evidence points this time to Elsie Barrow. Not out of malice, but wit. She knew when baskets were aired, where crayons were left, and how to plant a petal or a purse. Her legacy is narration. Her joy is confusion with meaning. She taught us to look for clues in the obvious. Every note, every list, every whisper mark is in the method, not the malice. Elsie, unflustered, shut her notebook. Inspector, if the town remembers its lessons for more than a week, I'll call it a miracle. Harmony, after all, is only interesting when it's restored. A ripple of laughter, richer than relief, circled the market hall. The mayor clapped Elsie on the back, Mrs. Rumsey wiped her eyes, and even Pettiford found a smile somewhere in his sourness. Inspector Purbright, his role now gently done, closed with a final reflection. We receive mysteries as opportunities, not burdens. A crooked raffle, a scattered petal, and a spiral under glass are reminders that harmony is not the absence of confusion, but its gentle management. Sergeant Love pocketed his notebook and whispered, "I doubt anyone will forget this spring's draw." By noon, Flaxborough's scandal had faded into a pleasant routine. Baskets were restored, stubs tucked into ledgers, and flowers aired for the next event. Elsie Barrow began her next chronicle. Purbright wandered away, hands folded, as the market resumed its ancient business, each petal now no longer a clue, but just a flower.